Last couple of weeks we looked at Genesis 2 and 3, a very well, they're all important texts, aren't they? But this one, getting us why we were created as humans, what happened, why there's a problem, and then a little bit about what the solution is. We're going to be in Exodus 3 today, which is a long time after Genesis 3. But we have, as we go through that, eventually Abraham gets called in Genesis 12, 15, and 17, and then his family keeps coming, and then Jacob and his family, who has been renamed Israel by then, end up in Egypt because of the famine because I suppose there wasn't much rain, but that's not a problem today, is it? Yeah, that's. So you want us to keep praying for rain, or stop? Yeah, keep praying for. And so they end up at the end of Genesis. They all come over, but if you go back a couple chapters to chapter 1, you have a verse 8, which is kind of what helps us, because we know all his brothers come. They're not that big. There's about 70 at that time, but now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Now we don't know the time period here. I'll give you that in a little bit. We guess. It's not, I don't think it's that he never heard of Joseph. It's just he didn't care, didn't want to, because he probably didn't think about the fact that if it wasn't for Joseph, all the Egyptians would have died out. But he figured out how to do that through the power of God, and so that's what we have. We have a new Pharaoh that is not liking that these Israelites are growing in number, and he puts them to slave labor, and that's what comes in. Now, the timing of this is hard. We think we know, but you hear that 400 years, but that's got a context. If you go to Genesis 17, it's 400 years from the time that Abraham's there. But you go to Exodus 12, and it looks like it's maybe 400 years from the time they got to the actual to Egypt. But Galatians kind of cleans that up, and you can read those texts yourself. And even in the first chapter, we see that things went well for a while they were there. I mean, they're good. It's just still when this Pharaoh, when trying to figure out who this Pharaoh is, and when that happened, it gives us some of this. We probably have about 210 years in Egypt total. And then, again, this is guesstimations. Between 90 and 120 of those years is in slavery, which is a long time. It's a lot of generations to be in slavery. We try to do the best with the timing. Again, if we were supposed to know exactly how many years that it would have been told, but we kind of guess. And before chapter 3, if you read through 1 and 2 here, this Pharaoh attempts to kill all the Hebrew male babies, thinking that might help keep the population down, which probably would have worked. But then we get these midwives' courage. They kind of stand up to Pharaoh, which is kind of cool. It's one of those courageous things. And he doesn't, you think, well, you're going to kill him. He doesn't. He just takes their word. It's kind of cool. And then Moses gets saved. We didn't do that one, but kind of a miraculous saving because of the ingenuity of his family and his sister, and eventually gets into the king's court because Pharaoh's daughter finds him in the reeds there and brings him in, and he grows up there. But then he realizes he's Hebrew, and there's a problem. I think, I don't know which degree murder it was. It was just trying to help somebody out, but killed an Egyptian. And he flees to Midian, and he starts his life there. Well, Midian, you all know where Midian's at. You always have to have a map, right? Maps are good. And even he ends up in this mountain that I kind of like this on one hand. On the other hand, it's kind of I was going to say annoying, but that's too strong. It kind of makes you think. There's kind of a mystery. We really don't know if Sinai and Horeb are the same place, but we think they are. There's two different words for the same place. And even the location is disputed. If you ever go to the Holy Land or in that area, we don't know about anything happened. I'm not even sure where Jerusalem is anymore. Not quite. It's not quite that bad. But you remember when we went through Mark, we had the Transfiguration, and they go up on the mountain. Which mountain? Doesn't say. So you have to, is it Tabor? Is it Hermon? It's like, and again, do you have to know what mountain it is? No. But this one's actually named. Well, here's a nice map for you. It's got a nice little Egyptian guy on there. And from last week, if you probably can't see it, but right there is a little snake. Kind of gives some context to Genesis 3, I think, but that's what they had on their head. But this is kind of this Goshen where they would have lived, and but they come all the way across here, and then we think this is where they cross the Red Sea, which from here to here is approximately 100 miles. So I don't know, you can do the math. There's probably 15 miles or so of crossing a deep sea without getting wet, which is fairly miraculous, I think. There's been all kinds of archaeology trying to say, well, it was just a marsh. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't really care that much. The text says it was. I'm good with that. I mean, do you really have problems? Miracles to me in the Old Testament I just don't get it. So God created everything out of nothing, but he can't move a little bit of water. That's just silly. I mean, if you believe the first one, you should believe the second one, right? In fact, maybe we think, why doesn't he move water more? Why can't he move, water out of the Keel's backyard and we can have it there? Whatever. It's almost like he just doesn't do his. But here's where the site of Mount Sinai is. But there's a traditional site. If you want to go see Mount Sinai, you're going to be over here. There's a monastery there. It's where we found Sinaiticus, which is one of the oldest complete Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. Around 360, they think that thing was written. The whole thing. Pretty cool. We've got that. But here's where they think they went across. But this is before all that happened, right? He's just hanging out down here. Well, this is where Midian was. Now, we think maybe Midian might have had some of this too, but, again, just when you think you got it figured out, you're like, okay, we're not quite sure. But this is where Moses is. He's on this mountain. He lives here. Well, how long has he been here, you're asking? Well, I'll tell you. We get that Exodus 7. We get this in Acts 7 during Stephen's speech, too. Moses was 40 when he was exiled. It seems that number keeps coming up, doesn't it? Always 40, for a lot of things. And he was 80 when he returned, which is 40 years later. So you got Moses. Moses is 80. So his beard was quite long by then. Yes, that's why they do it in the movies, right? So he was... that's when he gets called. And so that brings us to our text. If you have a heading, it's probably something like burning bush or something like that. And I'm not doing this to you. I'm just going to say there's people that spend time on what kind of bush this is. And I'm like, what difference does it make what kind of bush it is? It's not the bush that's the deal. It's the flame that we're supposed to be focused on. We don't bow down to the bush. Although some people probably do. So verses 1 through 4. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Well, not yet, but it's going to be. That's looking back. We believe Moses wrote these first 5 books of the Bible, and so we're gonna get a little bit of that, putting that back in there. That happens. So he's up on the mountain. He's just minding his own business. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, and it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned, which is kind of an interesting sentence, isn't it? I could do that. I'm saying, I will now turn aside and look at the congregation. It's like, why do you say this? I'm thinking it's pretty bright. What do they tell you when we had that eclipse? What do they tell you about looking at the sun? Don't. Yeah. If you're going to do the eclipse, you do the little hole and you put the thing and you see that. It's really cool. But that's I'm guessing he's kind of like, I'm going to turn aside. Hey, you in there. Can you tone it down a little bit? That's the... And so we have this angel of the Lord. So it says that in verse 2. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a bush. And then in verse 4, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. If you ever see multiple nouns in Hebrew, it usually means emphasis. The one you have in Isaiah 6, holy, holy, holy. It's like really super holy. That's what that means. You know. So Moses, it's probably not like Moses. It's probably Moses like that. You know, so you can listen. If you were asleep, you're now awake. Pretty cool. Well, hopefully. But look at this. Look at verse 2. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him. But then in verse 4, the Lord talks to him. Well, which one is it? Is it the angel of the Lord, or is it the Lord? Yes. How's that work? Well, we'll work on it. We're going to look at that. We'll look at that a little bit later. But this is in, you see this in some of the teachings prior to the New Testament of Jewish scholars. They mention this second Yahweh seems to show up. And it's a weird way to put it, isn't it? Because how many gods are we supposed to be following here? But yet, and usually this angel of the Lord is coming along that seems like Yahweh, but it's not quite Yahweh, but there's Yahweh here and there's angel. We'll explain that completely. We'll see. So the burning bush, God's presence in fire is quite common in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Later, we're going to find out, and interestingly enough, we won't look at those texts. You're welcome to, because next week's First Kings, because we're really we're going fast. But you look at, remember what guides them, or they follow this pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. And who's in the fire? Is it Yahweh? Well, kind of, but not really. Or maybe. It's the angel of Yahweh. But yet then when that entity speaks from the burning thingamajigger, which is a Aramaic word for, no, that's not it. I'm kidding. Yahweh speaks, even though it's the angel of the Lord in there. There's an interchangeability here, which is kind of cool. But you see the fire. Think about the different types of fire that burning things up, even in the New Testament. Hebrews 12. At the end of Hebrews 12, our God is a consuming fire. It's the same two words you have here. Consumed, but not burned up. Pentecost, tongues of fire. John the Baptist, I baptize you with water, but the one who comes after me will baptize you with fire. Yeah. Fire is good, isn't it? Well, kind of depends on how you use it, right? Yeah. If fire can warm you, it can cook, it can be bright, it can give light, and it can completely destroy something. Kind of sounds like God. If you get his mercy, which we've been singing about and taking communion for, then you get the warmth of God in the heart and all that. If you don't follow him and you are not obviously not worthy to be there, then you get the consuming part. That's not so. It's important to remember those things. So we'll get back to the angel of the Lord toward the end here. Here I am. Then he said, "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And that's probably good. Yeah, I don't think the text is saying that was bad. At this point, you see this in the Old Testament all the time. You see it in the New Testament some. When people really realize who's before them, they usually hit the ground. Get away. I'm not worthy. And God's like, yep. But that's the thing, even coming to the community, you're not worthy. I got to be careful with this because you don't want to take things away from people. But think about, sometimes people say, well, I'm not worthy to take communion. And I'm like, well, none of us are worthy to take communion. That's why we're taking it. If you were worthy to take it, then you probably shouldn't take it because you're probably too cocky. Now, again, if you feel like it's fine, I don't want to take that. I mean, if you think, well, I'm just not ready right now, that's fine. It's your conscience. You do it. But don't think I got to get myself to the point where I'm worthy. No, that's what we have it for. If you're already worthy, you don't need it. You know, when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, don't take it unworthy, he's talking about those people, the richer people that would come and eat all the food, and the poor smucks that were working 9 to 5 at Walmart came and they didn't have anything to eat yet. And he was being mean to them. Don't do that. Don't treat people like lesser humans and then say, hey, let's all have communion together. That's what he's talking about there. He's not talking about that, well, you just got to, got to feel holy. How do you feel holy? How do you make yourself feel holy? What happens, that verse always keeps coming back to my mind. God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. If you come to the table proud, you probably should stay away. You come humbly. And how do you get humble? Just look at the bush. Just like right here. Look at Jesus. When people really realize who Jesus is, they're not cocky. They just realize the grace. Same here. We got to continue this. So we got a problem here, and Moses is aware of it. And the Lord said, and notice you got L-O-R-D in caps. Do you all have that in your text? If you don't, you should. This is a translator's way in English to make the word we're going to see for God. It's the way, but he hasn't given the name yet, right? So how do we have it here? Remember, Moses wrote this way after it happened. He writes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, probably right in Deuteronomy time, because he dies at the end of Deuteronomy, and I'm guessing he probably didn't write the end of that. People think Joshua maybe did. But the thing is, so he's looking back, so he can put that word in there because he knows it now. I mean, if it ever happened to you, it happens in church, right? A lot. You meet somebody, and you're like, what's your name? And, of course, you're really smart, so you forget it. And then they come up and say, hey, Brian, how you doing? I'm like, you. Why didn't we do name tags? No, and it can happen to any of us. It's happened the other way to me. It's like, I don't know who you are. But again, so you at that point, you don't know their name, right? But they're still the person they are. But maybe you're smart enough later either to do some reconnaissance or something, you figure out their name. And then you can say about a encounter you had with that person and use their name even if you didn't know their name when you saw them, right? That's kind of what's happening here. He's taken the name that we're going to get revealed here in the burning bush experience and then putting it back on there. So we see, because we have it in there. We have, it's used in the in Genesis 140 times, but it doesn't get revealed till here. So he's going to ask his name. So we got a problem. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings and have come down to deliver them out of the hand of Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the various ites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel have come to me, and I have seen their oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come. So at this point, Moses is like, well, this is cool. God's going to take them out. Some of my ancestors will maybe get over here. It'd be kind of cool. Sure, I like this. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Uh-oh. You wonder, it's been 40 years. You wonder if there's still wanted posters up for him. Probably dead or alive by now, right? And Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And I kind of see him doing this in a very meek way. I mean, I don't think he's being cocky or anything. God's right there. I'm sure he's fairly humble at this point. He said, but I will be with you. Well, that's better. And this shall be a sign for you. Okay, it's always cool to have a sign. Maybe some armor. A big lion comes with me. That I have sent you, that when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on the mountain. The sign is this is going to work. So he's got a promise, right? You do this, it's going to work out. Now, if you read through Exodus, does it just go like that? You just go in and say, hey, Pharaoh, sure, take them. Is that the way? I watched the movie, if you haven't read the book. It takes a while. I mean, you can read other texts to find out why God's showing his glory through that. So Moses says to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of our fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Because, I'm going to have to introduce you to these guys. And notice it's not the Egyptians here, it's the Israelites he's talking to, who should know him as far as who he is, but they, the term in Hebrew for just general God is Elohim. And you'll see that kind of interspersed. But this is the Elohim. This is the one and only Elohim. And he's going to give you the divine name now, which is pretty cool. And God says to Moses, I am who I am. And he says, say to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So he's saying, I am did it, which is kind of an interesting name, isn't it? Do y'all have I am who I am? Anybody different? I mean, yell it out. I've got that. This is called the tetragram. This is the name. This is Yahweh. You read this way, Yod He Vav He. Yahweh. And you can spit if you want. But this is the divine name finally getting shown. It's revealed in a deep way here. It's a really interesting name. Yahweh. Sometimes we take the yas in Semitic languages and turn them into juz. We do that. And the W becomes sometimes a V. That's where you get Jehovah. It's the same word. It's just how you pronounce it. So the Yod, He, Vav, He, this is the way it's usually wrote in English. What it really means is existence. This is a word for existence. It's kind of a unique word. So when they translate, it's kind of hard. I've seen it translate, I have been who I have been, and I am who I am, but I will be who I'm going to be. Which makes kind of sense if Yahweh that we've seen in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, if that God is the one that's always been. This is kind of a nice name for him. Now, if you're a Jewish person, when we learned Hebrew in grad school, we didn't say it because the Jews didn't say it, so we don't say it. When you come across that divine name, you say Adonai, which is Lord. It gets you messed up when you read like Psalm 110 because it's the Lord said to my Lord, and one of those is Adonai and one of those is Yahweh. So how am I supposed to do this? But so you'll see Adonai used a lot. If you watch The Chosen, they use that word some. It's the divine name they don't say. But think about this. We forget this. In an ancient world of polytheism, pantheism, polytheism, obviously many gods, pantheism, that God's in everything and all this stuff, and you and in the birds and the paramecium and all that stuff, rocks, trees, chairs. That was out there. Judaism stands out as truly monotheistic. It's the only one. One God only. This is odd. He's going to go to a place where there's gods on every corner and tell that king that you need to let this free slave labor go. How do you think it's going to work out? It is a little rocky. Thank God for the 10 plagues. That does help. So, one God and only one God. But yet we got this second Yahweh sitting out here. So how do you deal with having one God? Which again, the word for, just for fun, I'm sure you care, the word for God, for one God, one is akkad, which is the word for unity. It can be one or, but you got this angel of the Lord. Is this the same? Is this Yahweh? And how do we do this? Well, ancient Jewish theology had this two-power idea, but once the New Testament came, they kind of backed from it because we've got this weird doctrine called the Trinity, which explains all this. I'm not going to go into it now. Read it. There's the Trinity is a solution, not a problem. It takes all this stuff and essentially systematizes it into the theology of who God is, and it's very biblical. That's why we believe it. But these two are used interchangeably. For I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. So who brought us out? I am the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal, and he said, I brought you out of Egypt. Well, who did it then? Was it the angel of the Lord, or was it the Lord? And that's when you get to say, yes. Yeah, they're kind of interchangeable. His very presence is at the very end here. He says, pay careful attention to him and obey his voice, because he's going to be in the fire. He's going to be in the pillar of smoke. For he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. And that's the key. My name is in him. And then you go forward to John 8, and Jesus is having a really big argument with people in the temple area. And he said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. That might not mean anything to you, but it did to them. Next verse is they want to kill him because he just made a divine claim. I am. That's the name of God. Before you guys existed, that's what that says. I was around. Yeah, they didn't like that. And even Philip asked, show us the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. We're not exactly the same. We are different centers of consciousness, but we're the one God. And then we find out later there's actually another one. But we're going to end up here in Judges. I wanted to hit this. Judges 11. Y'all wanted to do this. We're just going to kind of read through it. I'm not going to do much commentary. This time is a little short here. But Judges, this is the Gideon call. So now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the tree. So the angel of the Lord sat under a tree. That'd be cool. Which belongs to Joash the Abiezrite, who while his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midians, which is where Moses was. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you. And look, it's all L-O-R-D caps, O mighty man of valor. And Gideon said to him, please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our father recounted us, saying, did not he bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us to the hands of the Midians. And the Lord turned to him and said, well, I thought this was the angel. I am confused. It's interchangeable. As you read through it, that is the way it is. And what is cool for us is that through this text, we see that even in the Old Testament, there's something going on here. There's this Yahweh, but there's this angel of Yahweh that essentially has the power of Yahweh and interchangeably talks with Yahweh, but not exactly the same as this other Yahweh. And the Trinity doctrine completely codifies this in a very, very good way. And that's why we believe it. We don't believe in the Trinity because we're just trying to be weird. We're weird because we believe in the Trinity. No, it's the idea this is the way, it's the best way to understand the way God reveals himself. Jesus lands the plane like he does in everything else. There's kind of an invisible Yahweh that you never see in the Old Testament. And you know what? You really don't see him in the New either. You hear him a couple times. But then there's a visible one. Heck, he's under the tree here. Well, he also shows up in Nazareth. He shows up on the Sea of Galilee, and he ends up being in the temple, and we worship him because he died on a tree for us, and our sins are forgiven, the second Yahweh. It's just so cool when you understand this and get the feeling. This is always there, and it makes sense out of the whole text if you just let it do it. And so Gideon hears from Yahweh, but the angel of Yahweh's there, and they're obviously together, but they're not exactly the same way we have in the burning bush. And the same thing we have when this voice of Yahweh says to Jesus of Nazareth when he gets baptized, this is my son in whom I am well pleased. Let us pray. Father, as we look at this text, what an encounter that Moses had on the mountain, wherever that mountain is. Help us remember that all these promises we sing about and we think about, we read about, are true because of who you are. You've always been. You always will be. You are who you are. You will be who you will be. And you give us life by your mercy. And you let us come forward into that consuming fire and change our hearts to be able to obey you and live a life worthy of the calling. May we want to do that. Give us the desire, Lord, as we continue to sing. In your name, amen.